Dear child, some stories are never written in letters. Some feelings are never spoken out loud. Some hearts spend years waiting for one moment of courage. And today, you are about to hear the story of a love that refused to disappear. Listen carefully. This is not a promise about your future. It is a fictional story about two souls whose paths were separated by fear, silence, and the choices of others. One of them carried a message every single day but never found the courage to send it. While the world believed they had moved on, every quiet morning began with the same unanswered question: what if I had fought harder? Every evening ended with the same memory of the person they could never truly forget. There were countless moments when your soulmate picked up their phone, typed a message, and erased every single word before pressing send. They imagined what your life might look like now. They wondered whether someone else had taken the place they had always hoped to fill. They smiled at old memories, only to hide tears that nobody around them ever noticed. To everyone else they looked strong, but inside they carried the weight of unfinished conversations and unspoken apologies. Don't skip. Because the most important part of this story is not about grand gestures or dramatic promises. It is about the quiet moments that change a person's heart forever. Sometimes one memory returns without warning. Sometimes one familiar place brings back everything that was carefully buried. Sometimes a single photograph, an old song, or an unexpected name is enough to remind someone of the love they never truly left behind. As the days turned into months, your soulmate slowly realized that running away from their feelings had never brought them peace. Every attempt to forget only made the memories clearer. Every new beginning reminded them of the chapter they had left unfinished. Deep inside, they began asking themselves one question over and over again. If they were given just one more chance to tell you the truth, would they finally have the courage to say everything they had hidden for so long? Or would fear steal that moment once again? The silence between you and your soulmate had become heavier than either of you had ever imagined. Days continued to pass, seasons quietly changed, and life seemed to move forward for everyone else, yet deep inside their heart, one chapter remained unfinished. They tried to convince themselves that forgetting you was the only way to protect their emotions, but every attempt only brought your memories back even stronger. Every sunrise reminded them of conversations they never finished. Every quiet evening carried the echo of your laughter. Even when surrounded by people, there was a lonely corner inside their heart that no one else could reach because it still belonged to you. They wondered whether fate had truly separated two people forever or whether life was simply waiting for the perfect moment to reveal a truth that neither of you could see yet. Don't skip. Because the next part of this story is where everything begins to change in a way they never expected. There came one ordinary afternoon that looked no different from any other. The sky was calm, the streets were busy, and people hurried through their daily routines without realizing that someone's entire world was quietly shifting. Your soulmate found an old box hidden deep inside a forgotten shelf while searching for something completely unrelated. It had remained unopened for years, collecting dust and carrying silent memories. As they slowly lifted the lid, familiar photographs, handwritten notes, and tiny keepsakes appeared before their eyes. Each object seemed ordinary to everyone else, yet every single one carried a memory connected to you. Their hands began to tremble as they realized how many pieces of the past they had tried to hide instead of heal. For a long moment, they simply sat there, unable to move, allowing every forgotten memory to return one after another. One photograph caught their attention more than anything else. It wasn't the most beautiful picture, nor was it taken on a special occasion. In fact, it was a simple moment that almost anyone else would have ignored. Yet when they looked into that picture, they remembered something they had completely forgotten: the way you believed in them even during the darkest chapter of their life. While others questioned them, you quietly stood beside them. While people criticized their dreams, you encouraged them to keep going. Suddenly they realized that love had never been about perfect timing or dramatic promises. It had always been about the person who stayed when everyone else walked away. That realization struck their heart with overwhelming force, leaving them unable to hold back the emotions they had buried for so long. As night slowly covered the sky, sleep refused to come. They walked from one room to another, replaying every conversation, every misunderstanding, and every decision that had pushed both of you further apart. For the first time in years, they stopped blaming circumstances, family pressure, or fate. Instead, they looked honestly at their own fears. They admitted to themselves that silence had become their greatest mistake. They had believed that protecting you meant walking away, but now they understood that leaving without explaining anything had only created deeper wounds for both hearts. The truth they had spent years avoiding finally became impossible to ignore. There came one ordinary afternoon that looked no different from any other. The sky was calm, the streets were busy, and people hurried through their daily routines without realizing that someone's entire world was quietly shifting. Your soulmate found an old box hidden deep inside a forgotten shelf while searching for something completely unrelated. It had remained unopened for years, collecting dust and carrying silent memories. As they slowly lifted the lid, familiar photographs, handwritten notes, and tiny keepsakes appeared before their eyes. Each object seemed ordinary to everyone else, yet every single one carried a memory connected to you. Their hands began to tremble as they realized how many pieces of the past they had tried to hide instead of heal. For a long moment, they simply sat there, unable to move, allowing every forgotten memory to return one after another. One photograph caught their attention more than anything else. It wasn't the most beautiful picture, nor was it taken on a special occasion. In fact, it was a simple moment that almost anyone else would have ignored. Yet when they looked into that picture, they remembered something they had completely forgotten: the way you believed in them even during the darkest chapter of their life. While others questioned them, you quietly stood beside them. While people criticized their dreams, you encouraged them to keep going. Suddenly they realized that love had never been about perfect timing or dramatic promises. It had always been about the person who stayed when everyone else walked away. That realization struck their heart with overwhelming force, leaving them unable to hold back the emotions they had buried for so long. As night slowly covered the sky, sleep refused to come. They walked from one room to another, replaying every conversation, every misunderstanding, and every decision that had pushed both of you further apart. For the first time in years, they stopped blaming circumstances, family pressure, or fate. Instead, they looked honestly at their own fears. They admitted to themselves that silence had become their greatest mistake. They had believed that protecting you meant walking away, but now they understood that leaving without explaining anything had only created deeper wounds for both hearts. The truth they had spent years avoiding finally became impossible to ignore. Hours later, they opened a blank page and began writing everything they had never managed to say. The words didn't come easily at first. They erased sentence after sentence, wondering whether it was already too late. But eventually their heart spoke louder than their doubts. They wrote about every moment they regretted, every memory they still cherished, every apology they wished they had made long ago, and every hope that somehow refused to disappear despite the passing years. By the time they finished, tears had quietly fallen onto the page, leaving tiny marks that no one else would ever notice. Those tears carried more honesty than all the words they had hidden throughout the years. Don't skip. Because what happened the very next morning was something your soulmate never saw coming. Just as they were preparing to hide that letter forever, an unexpected conversation revealed a truth they had never been told before. Someone close to them finally admitted that many of the misunderstandings that separated both of you had never happened naturally. Quiet interference, hidden conversations, and decisions made by others had slowly built walls between two hearts that had once trusted each other completely. The moment those words were spoken, everything your soulmate believed about the past began to collapse. They realized they had been carrying guilt for only part of the story while an even bigger truth had remained hidden all along. That shocking revelation changed the direction of their thoughts completely. Instead of asking whether the past could be changed, they began asking whether the truth still had enough power to heal what had been broken. For the first time in a very long while, hope quietly returned to their heart. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a small feeling, almost impossible to notice, yet powerful enough to make them believe that unfinished stories sometimes deserve one final chance. Little did they know that before another day had passed, they would discover one more secret connected to your name. A secret capable of changing everything they believed about your separation forever. Morning arrived, but your soulmate could no longer pretend that everything was normal. The conversation from the previous night continued echoing through their mind, refusing to let them return to the comfortable lies they had believed for so long. Every answer they had accepted in the past suddenly seemed incomplete. Every painful memory carried new meaning. They realized that for years they had blamed themselves for losing someone who had never truly stopped caring. At the same time, they wondered how many opportunities had quietly disappeared because neither of you had been allowed to hear the whole truth. Don't skip. Because the next discovery would reveal that the story was far from over. Determined to understand everything, your soulmate decided to revisit places connected to the happiest memories they had shared with you. They walked through familiar streets, past old cafes, quiet parks, and corners that once held conversations filled with laughter and hope. Nothing looked exactly the same anymore, yet every place seemed to whisper a forgotten memory. It was as though time had moved forward while the emotions attached to those moments had patiently remained behind, waiting for someone brave enough to return. With every step, your soulmate felt the weight of regret becoming heavier, but alongside that regret came a growing determination to stop running from the past. Later that afternoon, they met an elderly family friend who had watched both of your lives from a distance. After a long silence, the elderly person quietly shared something unexpected. They explained that years earlier, several messages meant for both of you had never reached their destination. Some had been delayed, while others had disappeared completely. Misunderstandings had grown larger because important words of honesty had never been heard. Your soulmate listened without interrupting, their heart pounding with every sentence. Suddenly, countless moments that had once seemed confusing finally began to make sense. The silence that had separated two hearts was not always a choice. It had sometimes been created by circumstances neither of you fully understood. As the conversation continued, another truth surfaced. The elderly friend remembered seeing you defend your soulmate during a difficult time when many others had chosen to judge instead of understand. You had spoken with kindness when it would have been easier to stay silent. You had protected their name even when they never knew about it. Hearing this left your soulmate completely speechless. They had spent years believing that your feelings had disappeared, yet now they were learning that your actions had told a very different story. For a long moment, they simply lowered their head, overwhelmed by the realization that love had quietly survived in places where words had failed. That evening, your soulmate returned home carrying more questions than answers. They opened the unfinished letter once again and began adding new pages. This time, the words flowed naturally. They wrote about every misunderstanding they wished they could erase. They admitted the fears that had controlled their decisions. They confessed that despite everything life had placed between both of you, one part of their heart had never truly learned how to say goodbye. The letter became longer with every passing hour until it felt less like a message and more like the complete story they had hidden from the world. It was honest, vulnerable, and filled with emotions they had kept locked away for far too long. Don't skip. Because just when they believed they had finally written everything, something completely unexpected happened. While searching for an envelope, a small folded piece of paper slipped from inside the old memory box and landed on the floor. They were certain they had never seen it before. The paper looked aged, its edges slightly worn, as though it had been hidden for many years. Slowly, with trembling hands, they unfolded it. Inside was a short handwritten note containing only a few simple sentences, but those sentences carried a date, a place, and a truth that immediately changed everything. The note revealed that someone had secretly arranged a meeting between you and your soulmate years ago, believing that one honest conversation could repair everything. But neither of you had ever arrived, because each had been given different information by someone else. The meeting that could have changed your entire story had quietly disappeared before it even began. Your soulmate could hardly breathe as they realized how close both of you had come to finding each other again. One hidden lie had stolen a moment that might have rewritten both of your futures. Holding that forgotten note in their hands, your soulmate made a silent promise to themselves. They would no longer allow unanswered questions to control their life. They would uncover every missing piece, no matter how painful the truth became. Yet they had no idea that someone else had also discovered the same hidden note. And that person was already making plans to keep the biggest secret buried forever. The forgotten note remained in your soulmate's hands long after the sun had disappeared beyond the horizon. They read every line again and again, hoping the words would somehow change, hoping they had misunderstood what was written. But the truth remained exactly the same. Years ago, both of you had been closer to meeting again than either of you had ever realized. One honest conversation could have cleared away every misunderstanding, every painful assumption, and every silent goodbye. Instead, someone had quietly changed the course of two lives by making sure that meeting never happened. The realization left your soulmate completely overwhelmed. They no longer felt anger as much as they felt sorrow for all the time that had been lost. Don't skip. Because the next chapter reveals that the hidden truth was even deeper than they had imagined. Unable to ignore the growing questions inside their heart, your soulmate began searching through every old journal, every forgotten folder, and every small keepsake they had saved over the years. Most of the items brought back beautiful memories, but a few seemed strangely out of place. There were dates that no longer matched their memories, conversations that now seemed incomplete, and small details that suddenly felt incredibly important. Looking back with fresh eyes, they realized that certain events had never made sense. At the time, they had accepted them without question because pain often convinces people to stop searching for answers. Now, however, every missing piece seemed to point toward the same hidden truth. Late that evening, they received an unexpected visit from someone they had not spoken to in a very long time. The visitor appeared nervous, almost as though carrying a burden that had become too heavy to keep any longer. After several moments of uncomfortable silence, the person finally admitted that they had witnessed many things years ago but had been too afraid to speak. Family disagreements, misunderstandings, and outside influence had slowly created distance between two people who genuinely cared for one another. Small lies had been repeated so many times that they eventually sounded like undeniable facts. Your soulmate listened quietly, saying almost nothing, because every confession seemed to confirm what their heart had already begun to suspect. The visitor continued speaking, revealing that there had been more than one attempt to reconnect both of you. Messages had been delayed. Invitations had mysteriously disappeared. Honest conversations had been interrupted before they could begin. Each incident alone might have looked like an unfortunate coincidence, but together they formed a pattern that could no longer be ignored. Your soulmate felt their entire understanding of the past changing with every sentence. They had spent years believing that destiny had separated you, but now it seemed that human choices had played a much greater role than they had ever imagined. As the conversation ended, the visitor quietly placed one final item on the table before leaving. It was a small envelope with no name written on the outside. The paper had faded with age, but it had clearly been protected with great care. Your soulmate hesitated before opening it, almost afraid of what they might discover next. Inside was a handwritten page describing a conversation that had taken place years earlier between several people who believed they were protecting their families by keeping both of you apart. Reading those words felt almost unreal. Some of the reasons written there were based on assumptions, fears, and misunderstandings rather than facts. Decisions that had changed countless lives had been made without either of you ever being given the chance to explain your hearts. Don't skip. Because from that moment forward, your soulmate stopped asking whether you had ever cared. That question had finally been answered. Instead, they began asking something far more important. If so much of the past had been built upon hidden misunderstandings, how many other secrets were still waiting to be uncovered? Their determination grew stronger than ever before. They carefully gathered every letter, every photograph, every note, and every forgotten memory into one place, determined to rebuild the complete story piece by piece. Just before midnight, while organizing those memories, one old photograph slipped from between the pages of a journal. At first glance it looked completely ordinary. But when they turned it over, they discovered a handwritten sentence on the back that they had never noticed before. The handwriting was instantly familiar. Their heartbeat quickened as they slowly read the words. Whoever had written that message had known a truth that almost no one else knew. It mentioned one final meeting. A meeting that was supposed to happen only days after the one that had already been secretly prevented. Your soulmate froze. If that second meeting had truly been planned, then someone had worked twice as hard to make sure both of you never found each other again. And as they stared at the photograph in complete disbelief, their phones suddenly lit up with a message from an unknown number. There were only 7 words on the screen. But those 7 words threatened to change everything they had just discovered forever. I'm happy to continue it as a fictional story. The message remained glowing on your soulmate's phone as though time itself had stopped. Their fingers hovered over the screen, yet they could not bring themselves to touch it. 7 simple words stared back at them, carrying a weight far greater than anyone could have imagined. The truth is bigger than you think. Wait. There was no name, no explanation, and no clue about who had sent it. For several long minutes, they simply stared at those words, wondering whether this was another attempt to keep them away from the answers they had spent years searching for, or whether someone had finally decided it was time for every hidden secret to come into the light. Don't skip. Because the next few hours would test their courage more than any moment they had ever faced before. Instead of replying immediately, your soulmate quietly placed the phone on the table and closed their eyes. Their heart was racing with questions. Every new discovery seemed to uncover an even deeper mystery. They had started this journey believing they were searching for a forgotten memory, but now they understood they were uncovering an entire history that had been carefully buried beneath years of silence. The old letters, the missing messages, the cancelled meetings, the unexpected confessions, and now this anonymous message, all of them seemed connected by one invisible thread. Nothing felt random anymore. As dawn slowly approached, your soulmate made a decision. They would stop depending only on memories. If the truth still existed, then somewhere there had to be people who remembered what really happened. One by one, they began reaching out to old family friends, former neighbors, and people who had quietly disappeared from both of your lives over the years. Some politely refused to speak. Others claimed they remembered nothing. But a few hesitated before answering, as though carrying stories they had promised themselves they would never tell. Every conversation added another small piece to a puzzle that had remained incomplete for far too long. By the afternoon, one elderly neighbor agreed to meet. Their voice carried the calmness of someone who had watched many lives unfold over the decades. After listening carefully to everything your soulmate had discovered, the elderly person sighed deeply before saying something unexpected. People often believe that one single lie destroys a relationship, they said softly. But in truth, it is usually dozens of tiny misunderstandings that slowly build a wall until neither side can see the other anymore. Those words struck your soulmate with incredible force because they perfectly described everything they had begun to uncover. The separation had not happened overnight. It had been created little by little, decision after decision, silence after silence. The elderly neighbor then disappeared into another room and returned carrying a worn notebook that had clearly been kept for many years. Inside were dates, family gatherings, celebrations, and small observations written simply to preserve memories. While turning the pages together, your soulmate suddenly noticed something that made their heart skip a beat. On one particular date, the same week as the cancelled meeting, a short handwritten note appeared in the margin. It mentioned that someone had unexpectedly changed plans at the last minute after receiving incorrect information. The notebook didn't reveal who had provided that information, but it confirmed that confusion had spread through several families at exactly the same time.